On her wedding day, my daughter looked me in the eye and said, "Please don't come. You'll ruin the photos." That was 5 years ago. I stood in my kitchen now holding a glossy envelope with trembling fingers. The kind of envelope thick with money and meaning. It had gold trim, embossed letters, and the scent of expensive perfume. I almost thought it was a mistake, someone else's name, someone more presentable. But no, my name was written in elegant cursive across the front. Mrs. Margaret Moore. Inside, a folded card announced an exclusive charity gala, black tie event, hosted at one of the city's most prestigious venues. Cocktails at 6, dinner at 8, all proceeds to benefit medical research. And there, at the bottom of the organizer list, her name shimmered in silver foil. Dr. Evelyn Moore, my daughter. I must have read that name 20 times before I sat down. She hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't even sent a birthday card in 3 years. After the wedding incident, I stopped hoping. I told myself she was just busy, important, surrounded by people who spoke her language, wore her shoes, drank her wine. I didn't belong in that world. I was the mother she outgrew, like a too small coat, one she stuffed in the back of the closet and never looked at again. And yet, this invitation, a trick, a formality, a genuine olive branch? I placed the card on the table and stared at it as if it might bite me. The table itself was old, scarred from years of homework, spilled soup, and craft projects she once made with tiny fingers and the brightest smile. A table where she used to say, "I love you more than the moon, Mama," and fall asleep in my lap after long school days. I stood up and walked to the mirror. The woman looking back at me didn't belong at any gala. Gray creeping into her roots, wrinkles like softened rivers down her cheeks, a thrift store cardigan and calloused hands. There were no diamonds, no pearls, just me. I almost tore the invitation in half, but my fingers wouldn't let go. Instead, I slid it back into its envelope, placed it gently beside the teapot, and sat down again. The kettle whistled. I didn't move. My heart beat loud in my chest. She invited me after everything. But did she really want me there? Or was I just another name on a list, one she knew wouldn't show? I stared at the invitation like it held all the answers, and still, I didn't know what to do. Not yet. Friends, let me pause for just a moment. Please take a second to write in the comments, where are you listening from? Have you ever experienced something similar in your life? A moment when someone close made you feel like you didn't belong? If this story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. By doing that, you help us grow this channel and continue bringing you powerful, emotional stories every single day. Now, let's continue. I didn't always feel like a ghost in my daughter's life. Once, I was her whole world. I remember her little hand always reaching for mine, her laughter echoing through the apartment when we'd dance in the kitchen after dinner. She used to draw pictures of us, me in my apron, her with pigtails, and she'd tape them to the fridge with crooked pieces of tape. "That's you, Mama," she'd say proudly. "You're magic." But somewhere along the way, something shifted. Maybe it started in high school, when she stopped inviting me to parent nights and begged me to drop her off a block away from the entrance. Or maybe it was when she started calling me Margaret instead of Mom around her friends, like being mine was a detail she needed to blur. I told myself it was normal teenage behavior, that she'd grow out of it. I didn't realize then how deep her shame ran. She worked so hard to escape our life, our tiny apartment, our secondhand clothes, our dinners made from coupons and leftovers. I always admired her ambition. I pushed her to study, to dream bigger than what we had. I wanted more for her than late-night waitress shifts and aching feet. I just didn't expect that the further she rose, the more she'd cut the rope that tied us together. The first real break came at her college graduation. She was the valedictorian, first in her class, full scholarship, offers from every medical school she applied to. I was so proud I couldn't sleep the night before, ironing my only decent blouse 3 times, checking the bus schedule like it was a sacred text. I wanted to surprise her. I thought it would make her happy, but when she saw me walking toward her across the campus lawn, her face changed. It was subtle, just a flicker, but I caught it. The way her smile dropped for half a second before she recovered, the way she pulled her friends tighter, positioned her back to me, lowered her voice. I waved. She barely nodded. I watched her take photos with her professors, with her friends' families. mothers in designer heels, and fathers with leather watches. I stood at the edge of every frame, clutching the tiny bouquet I bought from the vendor outside the bus station. I stood there for over an hour, hoping she'd ask me to join just one picture. Just one. She didn't. Later that night, she texted me. "I'm sorry, but it was also last minute. I didn't want to make things awkward in front of the donors." That was the moment I stopped offering. I stopped trying to fit into a world that seemed allergic to who I was. The woman who raised her with scraped knuckles and no days off. The one who sat at the diner counter counting tip coins just to buy her new notebooks every fall. Didn't matter. To her, I was a story she didn't want anyone to read. A past she edited out of every chapter she told the world. A mother she tucked away in the dark like a secret stain on a white dress. And still, I loved her. Even when the wedding invitation never came, even when people asked if I had children, and I smiled through the burn in my chest and said, "Just one, she's a doctor now." Even when I was nothing but a name on a form, a birth certificate, a faded memory she wouldn't bring to light. So when that gala invitation landed in my mailbox, glowing with her name in silver, I didn't just see an event. I saw a crack in the door that had been slammed shut for years. And against every instinct that told me to protect my heart, I started to hope. Just a little, just enough to hurt. I kept the dress in the back of my closet, wrapped in a dry cleaner's plastic sleeve from years ago, though God knows I never had the money to take it anywhere but the laundromat. It was navy blue, with tiny beads along the collar, most of them still intact. I had worn it once, maybe twice, to weddings or funerals where I needed to look like someone else. Someone who had it together. Someone who belonged. I slid it off the hanger with careful hands, as if the fabric might dissolve if I touched it too roughly. It smelled faintly of lavender and dust. I held it up to my body, standing in front of the cracked hallway mirror, and I already knew. The waist didn't sit where it used to. The zipper would fight me. The sleeves clung too tight around my arms, but I didn't have another option. I slipped it on anyway, sucking in my breath, tugging at the seams. It barely closed in the back. The fabric stretched around my middle, clinging to parts of me that had softened with time. I didn't look elegant. I looked like someone trying too hard not to look poor. Still, I stood up straighter, smoothed my hair, applied the one shade of lipstick I owned, worn down to the base. I added a pair of earrings my sister gave me 15 Christmases ago, faux pearls that caught the light just enough to pretend. Then I looked in the mirror again. The woman staring back wasn't glamorous or graceful. She looked tired, real, a mother, a waitress, a survivor of years that never gave her a break. But under the tiredness, there was something steadier, something quiet and strong. I didn't put on that dress because I thought it would impress anyone. I wore it because I needed to remind myself that I was still here, still standing, still worthy, even if no one in that ballroom would think so. I walked to the bus stop with a coat wrapped tight around me, holding the invitation like it was made of glass. It was already dark by the time I arrived at the venue, the lights of the hotel shining like stars fallen to earth. Valets opened doors for sleek cars. Laughter drifted from the entrance like a language I didn't speak anymore. I paused across the street, watching women in satin glide up the stairs, their heels clicking like punctuation. I could see the chandeliers through the glass, the shimmering gold and silver, the sparkle of money in every corner. And there I was, clutching a thrift store clutch and walking in shoes that pinched with every step. Part of me wanted to turn around, to disappear, to go back home, take off the dress, boil a cup of tea, and pretend the invitation never came. But mothers don't turn away, not when it matters, and this mattered, even if my daughter didn't know how much. Even if she had sent that card out of obligation or guilt or pressure from someone else. She had opened the door. And even if I had to walk through it with trembling legs and a heart full of old bruises, I would walk through it. Because a mother never forgets. Not the pain, not the hope, and especially not the child she once held with both hands and all her heart. So I crossed the street, lifted my chin, and stepped into the place where I was never meant to belong. The warmth hit me first. The thick, perfumed air of the ballroom, scented with lilies and champagne, pressed close around me like a second skin I didn't ask to wear. Music played softly in the background, the kind you only ever hear in movies and luxury elevators, each note elegant and cold. I stood just beyond the entrance for a moment, uncertain where to move. The woman at the check-in table barely looked up when I handed her my card. She scanned it quickly, gave a tight smile, and gestured toward the open doors. No welcome, no warmth, just procedure. Then I stepped into the room. The ballroom was lit like a dream, all golden halos and silver flickers, light bouncing off glass and polished shoes and sequin-covered backs. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. Tables glittered with candlelight and tall centerpieces bursting with white orchids and soft green vines. It should have been beautiful, but all I felt was small. Heads turned when I entered, not in admiration. No one smiled, no one gasped with delight. The glances were brief, passing, some mildly curious, most indifferent. A few of the women gave tight, courteous smiles, the kind you offer to someone you hope walks in a different direction. Men blinked past me as though I were a coat rack someone forgot to move. I walked slowly, my heels too loud against the floor like they were announcing, "She doesn't belong here." And I didn't. The dresses around me shimmered with designer labels. The suits were custom cut. Laughter flowed like wine, easy, effortless. And me, I felt like a black and white photograph in the middle of a Technicolor film. My dress pulled at the seams, my makeup already slipping, my heart pounding too loudly in my ears. A waiter brushed past me carrying a tray of champagne flutes, and for a moment he paused and glanced back, as if wondering why I wasn't in the staff entrance. Another passed, and I caught the faint look in his eyes. Recognition not of me, but of something familiar. A fellow service worker, a woman used to asking, "Still or sparkling?" not sipping from the glass. I clutched my invitation tighter, the edge of the paper digging into my palm. Proof that I wasn't trespassing, that I had been asked, invited, that I had a reason to be here, even if it was buried beneath pity or formality. I spotted an empty chair near a corner table and started walking toward it, hoping to disappear into a corner. But before I got far, someone else filled the seat, and I was left standing there, uncertain again. No one offered a space. No one asked if I needed help. I looked for Evelyn. Surely she was here. Tall, graceful, camera-ready. I scanned the room for that familiar posture, the sharp chin she got from her father, the way she always tucked her hair behind one ear when she was nervous. But all I saw were strangers. And yet, every time someone laughed too loudly or called out a name across the room, I flinched, afraid it would be hers, afraid of how she might look at me now, or worse, how she wouldn't. I moved along the edge of the ballroom like a shadow, quiet, invisible, trying to find a place to settle. Not just a seat, but a space to exist in this world that didn't know me, that didn't want to. The dress itched. The lights burned. My throat was dry, but I was too afraid to approach a waiter again, not after the way the last one glanced at my shoes. And still I stayed. Because somewhere in this glittering cathedral of pride and pretense was the girl I once carried on my back through rainstorms. The child I read bedtime stories to when the power went out. The daughter I once believed I'd never lose. And even if all I got was a glimpse of her from across a crowded room, it would be enough. At least that's what I told myself. But something deep in my bones already knew. This night would not go the way I imagined. Not even close. And then I saw her. It was like watching sunlight pour through a crack in the ceiling. Sudden, blinding, impossible to ignore. My breath caught in my throat before I even realized I'd been holding it. She stood near the center of the ballroom, surrounded by a small circle of polished people with gleaming teeth and delicate laughter, like a planet orbited by stars that knew exactly how to shine. She wore ivory, not white, not cream, but something more refined, more expensive, more intentional. Her dress hugged her frame like it was made just for her, sculpted to suggest power without having to speak it. A strand of pearls clung to her throat, and her dark hair was swept into a low bun, not a strand out of place. She was everything this room required, poised, graceful, and impossible to look away from. She looked magnificent, but not like my Evelyn. Not the girl who used to wear mismatched socks and run barefoot through the park, squealing when the sprinklers turned on. Not the teenager who used to curl up beside me on the sofa and ask, "Do you think I'll ever make it out of here?" That girl was gone. This woman was someone else, sculpted, protected, untouchable. She hadn't seen me yet, so I stood still, afraid to move, afraid to speak, as if the simple sound of my voice might shatter her carefully constructed world. I could have left. I could have slipped away, found the nearest exit, and told myself I tried. But I stayed. And then she turned her head, and her eyes met mine. I expected surprise or discomfort, maybe even a flicker of guilt. But what I saw in her expression was worse than any of those. It was calculation. In a blink, she stepped away from her circle of colleagues and made her way toward me. Her heels clicked softly against the floor, and her smile was already painted on before she reached me. Polite, performative, the kind you wear for donors and photographers. She leaned in close, too close, and just beneath the sweet, rehearsed smile, her voice came out in a whisper, clenched between her teeth. "You can't sit there," she said without even greeting me. "That's for the board." I blinked. The air between us felt suddenly thin, like I might fall through it. "No, hi, Mom. No, you came. No warmth." Just that one sentence. Not a request, a warning. Her hand barely touched my arm as she motioned toward another section of the room, toward the shadows, toward where I wouldn't be seen. And then, just like that, she turned and walked away. Back to her circle, back to her world, back to her safety, leaving me behind. The blood in my ears roared like waves crashing into concrete. I hadn't expected much, but I had expected something. A glance, a moment, a flicker of the daughter I once held to my chest and rocked to sleep through fevered nights. But all I got was an instruction, a rejection wrapped in pearls and silence. I looked toward the table I had been approaching. Yes, the seats were labeled, tiny cards in gold lettering. Her name was there, along with others I didn't recognize. I hadn't even intended to sit. I was just trying to be near her, to feel for a fleeting moment that I hadn't become a stranger in her life. But I had. And it wasn't subtle. It wasn't whispered. It was made crystal clear in 5 words. "You can't sit there." My hands trembled slightly, so I folded them together to hide it. I could feel the eyes again. Not many, but enough. A few guests glanced over, curious about the woman who clearly didn't know the rules, the outlier, the mistake. I stepped back slowly, pretending to examine the flower arrangements, as if I had meant to do just that all along. I found a small spot near the edge of the room and stood there, quiet, unnoticed, like furniture. I could feel her presence across the room, laughing now, nodding to someone. Her face relaxed again, like the interruption had never happened. It was strange, the way shame can wrap around your ribs like wire, not hot and loud, but cold, cold and steady. A private humiliation you carry without letting it show on your face. I stood very still, and I did not cry. Not here, not where she could see, not where it would look like weakness. But inside, something folded in on itself. Not in anger, not even in disappointment. Just in a kind of quiet, aching acceptance. I wasn't a mother tonight. Not to her. Not here. I slipped closer to the edge of the room, hugging the polished wall behind a towering floral arrangement, its pale petals an ironic shield against the cold stairs. Glass in hand. Water, but I clasped it as if it were champagne. I tried to steady my breath, to make my pulse settle so my heart wouldn't betray me through faint tremors in my fingertips. All around me, the sound of laughter swelled, high-pitched tinkles of amusement, low, smoky chuckles like velvet ropes keeping me out of their circle. I caught snippets of their banter. Rich girls with manicured nails turning wine glasses by the stem, comparing jewel tones of their gowns, whispering about upcoming board meetings and investment portfolios. I heard one clipped voice, sharp with amusement, say, "Who let the cleaning staff in here?" It rolled through the cluster like a stone thrown against glass. The others cackled, and I felt shards of that mirth lodge in my chest. Their laughter echoed in my mind like children on a playground jeering at someone on the swings. Except these children were grown, wearing silk and satin, and the swings were my pride and dignity, set swinging before me just out of reach. The woman who spoke was flawless. Dark eyebrows arched just so, lips glossed like a promise. Smiling at her own cleverness while I stood there, invisible but hyper-aware, every breath a confession that I had no place among them. And my daughter, my brilliant, accomplished Evelyn, leaned into their circle, laughter slipping easily from her lips, her eyes bright with complicity. For a moment, I watched her hair catch the chandelier's glow like spun copper, her posture perfect, her features softened by the warm light. I remembered that child who used to press her cheek against mine, giggling at some private joke no one else understood. That girl was buried under a layer of ambition and expectation now, buried so deep that tonight's laughter simply slid over her shoulders without touching her heart. I closed my eyes, trying to block it out, but the image of their amused faces stayed there, sharp and unforgiving. My mouth felt dry. The wall behind me was cool, but I burned from the inside out. I pressed my palm flat against the marble, willing myself to calm down, to breathe, to not let their cruelty define me. But every chime of their giggles resonated like a blow. I was the outsider, the punchline, the mistake someone had brought along as a curiosity. Time dragged on, each minute a heavy footstep echoing in an empty hall. I found my gaze drifting to the stage, where the host stood, poised to speak, unaware of the drama unfolding in the shadows. I thought of walking away then, slipping out the back entrance into the night air, letting the cool wind wash away the memory of their laughter, of my daughter's ease at my expense, letting myself disappear into the dark before I crumbled. But something held me there. A stubborn flicker of pride, a mother's unspoken promise, refused to let me surrender completely. I straightened my spine, lifted my chin, even as my fingers clenched the stem of the glass until the water sloshed dangerously close to the rim. I refused to dissolve into the corner. I refused to let their laughter silence me. I looked back at Evelyn one more time. Her laughter died on her lips for a fraction of a second when our eyes met. My heart leapt, hopeful for a moment. Maybe she'd see me, really see me, behind the dress that didn't fit and the tenuous invitation. But then her eyes flicked away, and the warmth left her face as quickly as it had come. She swallowed a sip of champagne and turned back to her friends, her expression smoothing into the practiced mask of a successful woman among equals. And once again, the laughter swept me under like a relentless tide, leaving me stranded on the far shore with nothing but my own beating heart and the memory of what once was. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply, and whispered to myself, I am here. I am still here. Because even when their laughter cuts deepest, it cannot erase a mother's love, or the courage it takes to stand in the room where you were never meant to be seen. The hum of polite conversation and clinking glasses seemed to fade as I stood frozen against the wall, squeezed between a lush fern and the shadows. I must have looked like a lost lamb in a sea of polished gazelles, but then I felt a pair of eyes lock onto mine from across the room. He was impossible to miss. Tall, confident, tailored suit, the kind of presence that commands a room without saying a word. Daniel Hart. I remembered him before he was a rising star, before glossy magazine covers and boardroom accolades. I remembered him with dirt under his fingernails and a haunted look in his eyes. The kid I let sleep behind the diner during a late spring storm. The one I fed when everyone else turned away. I'd never told my daughter. How could I? I worried it would tarnish her image of me, remind her of a past she'd worked so hard to outgrow. Yet here he was, across the marble floor, moving toward me like a beam of light, his expression shifting between disbelief and warmth. He swept aside the fern fronds as though they were curtains unveiling a secret stage. Time slowed. I felt the edges of my breath catch. My heart thumped a staccato drum in my chest, reminding me I was still alive, still capable of hope, still capable of bracing for kindness in a room built on judgment. Mrs. Moore? His voice was both question and exclamation, as if he couldn't believe his own words. My name felt strange on his tongue, like the echo of a melody I had almost forgotten. I nodded, unable to speak for the moment, my throat tight with emotion. His smile was gentle, unguarded, the antithesis of the carefully measured expressions all around us. I'm honored. I didn't think you'd come. Those words sank into me like soft rain on parched earth. Not a polite courtesy, not a fleeting greeting. I could see in his eyes that he meant it. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear, and the noise of the gala melted into the background. The polished chandeliers, the glittering gowns, the laughter that had cut like knives just moments ago. All of it receded, until it was just the two of us, tethered by memories neither of those guests could imagine. I placed a trembling hand over my heart, feeling its steady beat. I thought of the nights I'd sat up, fretting over rent and hospital bills and how to keep his hope alive when he had lost everything. I thought of the moment he walked into the diner's back door, soaked and shivering, and the fierce ache in my chest that told me I had to help him no matter what. He guided me gently toward a small side table, offering me a glass of water as though it were fine champagne. His eyes never left mine, full of gratitude and something deeper, respect perhaps, or acknowledgement of a debt that could never truly be repaid. People around us shifted, their glances curious. They saw us, I realized, but they didn't understand the gravity of this reunion. To them, I was just another guest arriving late. To me, he was living proof that kindness once given returns in ways you never imagined. He placed a hand on my shoulder, light but firm, and said, "Thank you for being there for me when no one else would." No microphones, no audience, just two souls bound by a quiet, unspoken pledge of generosity. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. Instead, I pressed a thumb to my lips and whispered, "You deserved better." He shook his head. His smile trembled just a fraction. No, I got what I needed. Hope. A surge of pride swelled inside me, stronger than any shame I'd felt tonight. In that moment, I was not the mother my daughter had shamed, not the charity case the guests had mocked. I was simply Margaret Moore, the woman whose small act of compassion had changed a life, and whose life was being changed again by recognition in a ballroom I never expected to conquer. As he stepped back to return to his duties as host, his hand slipped into mine for an instant, a silent promise that I wasn't invisible, that my place in this world mattered far more than any label. My chest tightened with a fierce joy I hadn't allowed myself to feel all evening, and as I watched him blend into the swirl of tuxedos and gowns once more, I realized that tonight's story was far from over. The invitation had been just the first step. The real journey toward truth, reconciliation, and the unbreakable bonds of love was only beginning. I watched him melt into the crowd, his tailored suit merging with a sea of dark fabric and polished smiles, and for a moment I stood alone amid the glittering spectacle, the echo of his gratitude still humming in my veins. It struck me then how few people in this room could imagine the journey that had led him to stand here as tonight's host. They saw a successful businessman, confident and composed, but they didn't see the boy who slipped through this city's cracks, cold, hungry, and desperate. They didn't know he once called the steel shelving in my diner's storage room his home, listening to the rain drum on the roof overhead as he clutched a thin blanket and prayed for morning. I remembered the first time he came in. Dirty sneakers, face streaked with grime, eyes haunted by a lifetime of mistrust. No one else would serve him, but I slid him a plate of steaming eggs and bacon, offered a cup of coffee that burned still in my memory. He sat at the counter in silence, shoulders trembling, until the tremors stopped, and a fragile spark of relief lit his eyes. I never asked questions. Sometimes kindness is a quiet gift, no explanations required. When the morning thunderstorm caught him sleeping on the park bench, I brought him back, tucked him in among the boxes, and whispered that he could stay until the rain stopped. He never asked for more. Over the years, I scarcely spoke of him to Evelyn. I was proud of the work I did, of the hope I planted in that broken boy's heart, but I feared telling my daughter would somehow undermine the pristine image she had built of me. I kept those memories locked away, like old photographs in a drawer, afraid to show the world the woman who once knelt on grimy linoleum floors to tie shoelaces and mop tears. But tonight, as Daniel's warm gaze found mine again from across the room, I realized those quiet acts of mercy were my truest legacy, more profound than any diploma or board seat. His success was a living testament to what a single act of compassion could yield. As I stood there, the hush of the gala settling into a respectful lull for the evening's keynote, I felt a quiet pride swell through me, stronger than any shame or doubt. I had given him sanctuary, and in return, he gave me this moment, a place at his side, a recognition that transcended wealth and status. And though many here saw me as an uninvited guest, someone to be hidden away at the edges, Daniel's presence reminded me that the bonds forged in kindness are unbreakable. In that realization, I found a power I thought I'd lost, an unshakable confidence that who I was mattered far beyond the cut of my dress or the buzz of polite conversation. Tonight, my past was no longer something to hide. It was the very reason I stood here, alive and honored, in a world that once tried to forget me. The room fell into a hush as the lights dimmed and the stage lights focused on the podium, casting Daniel in a halo of warm glow. My heart clenched in my chest as the orchestra's last note faded, and the host's deep voice welcomed us to the evening's program. I felt the pull of every gaze in the room, a collective breath held in anticipation, and for a moment I wondered if I should shrink back behind the ferns and shadows, pretend I'd never shown up at all. But I stood my ground, clutching my glass of water like a lifeline, every nerve alive with fear and hope tangled together. When Daniel approached the microphone, I braced myself against the wooden stage, nails digging into my palm. He spoke with calm assurance, his rich, measured tone precisely what you'd expect from a businessman used to commanding attention. "Tonight's event," he began, "is to honor someone who changed my life when no one else would." A polite ripple moved through the audience. Soft smiles exchanged as people prepared mentally for some glossy tale of corporate mentorship or academic endowment. I felt my breath hitch, certain the story would be about a scholarship he'd funded or a board member he admired, someone as polished and picture-perfect as this gala itself. But then I saw the flicker at the edge of his eyes when he glanced my way, the hesitation in his throat as he swallowed a memory too vivid to tame. And just as the room leaned in, expecting another chapter in the playbook of privilege, Daniel paused. The silence stretched, thick and shimmering. I closed my eyes for a heartbeat, recalling the nights I spent scrubbing tables long after closing hours, whispering promises of a better tomorrow to that frightened teenager I found trembling in the rain. My chest tightened with a gentle pang, an ache that felt like both joy and fear, and I opened my eyes to meet the sea of curious faces. Then he spoke my name, my real name. The syllables held in his voice an intimacy no one here could comprehend. He said, "Margaret Moore." My knees threatened to give way as a current of warmth flooded through me, a river of acknowledgement that swept aside every doubt I'd carried into this room. The polite applause I'd expected erupted instead into genuine rising ovation, each clap a tribute not to prestige, but to compassion and humanity. I felt tears gather, blurring the chandeliers into halos of gold, and I realized that this moment, this unexpected vindication, had been waiting for me long before I ever set foot in this ballroom. As I made my way to the stage, every step felt surreal, as though I were walking through a dream I dared not wake from. Faces turned toward me, not with polite curiosity, but with real wonder, and I understood that justice sometimes arrives wrapped in the softest, most surprising forms. In that instant, the ballroom transformed from a place of judgment into a sanctuary of truth, where the quiet acts of a single mother in a diner had become the very foundation of someone's success and someone's gratitude. And as I climbed the few steps to stand beside Daniel, the applause swelling around me, I felt the full weight of this night's promise, that love, once given freely, returns to claim the honor it has always deserved. They say you never forget the first time someone truly believes in you. I felt that belief wrap around me like a warm blanket, as Daniel's hand rose, steady and sure, pointing straight at me. The microphone crackled to life again, and his voice, rich, unwavering, filled every corner of the glittering hall. "Stand up, Mrs. Moore," he said. Gasps rippled through the audience, sharp as whispered secrets. I stood frozen, as though the floor beneath me had vanished. The spotlight swung in my direction, bright and unrelenting, as though unveiling a portrait no one expected to hang in this gallery of privilege. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might burst through my ribs. For a moment, I was that frightened teenager again, breathless in a storm-soaked alley, desperately hoping someone would see me. I took a single step forward, then another, each one heavy with the memory of years spent wiping tables at dawn, hands raw from scrubbing away the stubborn stains of other people's leftovers. I could almost feel the grit under my nails, the ache of a body pushed past its limits, the hush of my own tears when I thought no one was watching. All of it had led to this, the polished floorboards beneath my trembling feet, the hush of hundreds of strangers, the bright glare of recognition focused solely on me. Daniel smiled, his eyes soft with gratitude. He turned to the crowd and said, "She fed me when I had nothing, taught me dignity. Everything I am is because of her." A wave of emotion swept through me, pride, disbelief, tenderness, and the ache of every wound that had ever left a scar. I saw Evelyn's face in the front row, mouth parted, a flicker of shame passing across her features before she bowed her head. I felt her regret echoing in her posture, a quiet apology without words, and it fueled me. I straightened my shoulders and inhaled deeply, letting the warmth of 1,000 hearts lift me up. The applause thundered like rolling surf. Hands clapped, feet tapped, whispers of bravo and thank you rippled through the air. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting it wash over me. The validation of a life lived in service, the proof that kindness carved its own legacy. When I finally found my voice, it was steadier than I could ever have imagined. I lifted the microphone and addressed the room, though it felt like I was speaking to every version of myself I had ever been. The scared young mother, the weary waitress, the hopeful dreamer. "I never did this for recognition," I began, my voice catching and then finding strength. "I did it because I believe in the power of love, the kind that sees people when they feel invisible, that offers a seat at the table when the world turns its back. If kindness can light the path out of darkness for one young man, then it's worth every sacrifice." Tears fell down my cheeks, shining in the spotlight like droplets of silver. I let them fall. And in that moment, surrounded by strangers who had become witnesses to my truth, embraced by the glowing pride of the child I once held so close, I knew that no force on earth could ever dim the light of a heart that chooses compassion. The thunderous applause felt like it rolled through my bones, a living pulse that carried me back to the edge of the stage. I could still feel the heat of the spotlight, the echo of Daniel's words, but all of it paled against the sight of my daughter's face. Evelyn's perfect composure shattered in an instant. Her lips parted, eyes widening until they seemed too large for her face, ashen, as if someone had drained the color from her skin all at once. I saw the quick intake of breath, the sharp catch in her throat, and the momentary tremor in her hands as she reached for the champagne glass in front of her, only to let it slip from her grasp. The glass stayed balanced on the table rim, fragile and poised to topple, just like her carefully crafted world. Her friends, the same ones who moments ago had raised toast after toast in her honor, turned to look at her. Their smiles faltered, masks cracking under the weight of surprise and confusion. Whispers darted through their circle like startled birds. "Is that her mother? I thought she didn't have family here. Why didn't she tell us?" Each question was a small betrayal cutting through the room's warmth, piercing the veneer of civility that had sustained this gala. And there she stood, at the center of it all, exposed for the first time not as the flawless doctor or the polished philanthropist, but as a daughter who had once turned her back on her mother. Her betrayal of me had been sharp and deliberate, an act of self-preservation, she might have told herself. But now, in the face of my unyielding grace, her own heart must have felt the sting of regret. The tables had turned, and only one of us stood with the dignity of compassion intact. I felt a fierce tenderness rise in my chest, not only for myself but for her, my child who had lost her way in pursuit of perfection. For all her ambitions, she had forgotten the woman who taught her to dream, the arms that held her through every scrape and heartbreak. And yet, in that vulnerable moment, I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. A silent apology, a question, a plea. I stepped down from the stage as the applause softened, walking across the polished floor toward the place where she lingered, surrounded by worried friends and disbelieving strangers. Each step was a statement. "I forgive you. I'm still here. You can still come home." She met me halfway, eyes glistening with unshed tears, lips quivering. Her friends melted back, leaving us in a bubble of hush. I placed a gentle hand on her arm, surprising her with its warmth, and she blinked against the flood of emotion that broke through her defenses. There was no dramatic reunion, no tearful embrace, just a quiet moment of truth between us, where the weight of her shame met the expanse of a mother's love. The guests watched, rapt, as the woman she had once hidden now offered her hand without hesitation, as if nothing in the world mattered more than repairing the bond they had both frayed. In her eyes I saw apology. In mine, acceptance. And in that single exchange, a look unspoken but deeply felt. The betrayal that had once cut so deep became the catalyst for something far stronger. The grace to forgive, the courage to reconcile, and the understanding that family, however flawed, remains the heart's truest home. The sound of hands clapping rolled through the ballroom like a tide breaking against the shore, growing louder, more insistent with each passing second. Faces blurred into a sea of warm smiles and outstretched hands as guests pressed forward, eager to offer congratulations, to shake my hand, to tell me how moved they were by Daniel's words and my speech. I felt the soft brush of fingertips against my arm, heard murmurs of, "Thank you for sharing your story. Your kindness changed everything, and you're an inspiration to us all." Strangers I'd never met before wiped tears from their cheeks as they spoke, their eyes shining with genuine gratitude. I stood at the edge of that applause, my chest swelling with a fierce, impossible joy. Every clap echoed the choices I had made in quiet moments long ago. The nights I'd stayed late cleaning tables so I could spare extra change for a warm meal. The mornings I'd whispered words of encouragement to a frightened boy who saw no future. I let their words wash over me, letting the warmth of their recognition fill the spaces where shame and doubt once lived. Yet in the midst of that chorus of approval, my daughter remained frozen. Evelyn stood a few paces away, her back stiff, her shoulders curved inward as if she were trying to make herself smaller. Her friends had gathered round her, but their congratulations had turned into awkward, half-hearted claps, as if uncertain how to respond to the woman Evelyn had so vehemently tried to hide. I watched her in the soft glow of the chandelier light, her face pale, lips parted, eyes wide and rimmed with tears she could not release. She mouthed a single phrase, barely moving her lips. "Mom, I didn't know." It carried across the space between us, a confession laced with shame and regret. Her voice, though silent, trembled with the weight of all the years she had spent pretending, all the time she had suppressed the truth of where she came from, and of who had shaped her into the woman she'd become. I walked toward her through the lingering guests, each step measured and calm, as though I were following a path I'd always known I'd walk. People parted politely, their eyes shining with newfound respect and admiration. But my focus was only on Evelyn. She lowered her gaze as I neared, uncertainty flickering across her features. I reached her side and gently touched her arm, my hand warm and steady, a bridge across the gap between us. Around us, the ballroom continued to hum with celebration. Champagne flutes clinked, the soft glow of candlelight danced across polished surfaces, and the laughter resumed, gentler now, as if guided by the grace of forgiveness. I turned to Evelyn, and for a moment I saw the child I used to tuck into bed with stories of heroism and hope, the girl who believed the world could be kind if you just held on to your faith. Without a word, I offered her my hand. She looked down at our joined fingers, then back up at my face, at the lines that bore witness to years of sacrifice, at the eyes that still shone with unwavering love. Her shoulders trembled once, and then she closed the distance between us, her other hand coming up to hold mine. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible, but in that moment it carried the weight of 1,000 apologies and 1,000 promises. Behind us the applause died away, replaced by a respectful silence as Evelyn's friends realized what was happening. A mother and daughter, flawed but unbreakable, finding their way back to each other in the midst of a world that had tried to keep them apart. I squeezed her hand gently, and she finally let the tears fall. They glimmered like pearls on her cheeks, and I brushed them away with the thumb of my other hand, just as I had done so many times before when she was a little girl. "I'm here," I whispered, voice soft but unwavering. I've always been here. She nodded against my touch, her tears soaking into the fabric of my dress, and for the first time that night she smiled, a fragile, beautiful curve of understanding and love. And in that shared moment, surrounded by strangers turned witnesses to our reconciliation, I knew that the deepest echoes of this evening would not be the grand speeches or the glittering chandeliers, but the simple truth of a mother's forgiveness and a daughter's return. I'd never imagined I'd stand before a crowd like this again, much less as the one speaking, but there I was, the microphone trembling beneath my fingertips as the hush settled over the room. My dress still bore the faint stain of my daughter's tears, and every fiber of me ached with the memory of where I'd come from. Years of early mornings wiping counters when the diner's neon sign blinked off, nights spent counting coins to buy textbooks, afternoons comforting broken hearts that no one else would notice. I drew in a breath that felt like inhaling courage itself and lifted my chin, letting the warmth of the spotlight settle on my face as if it were a gentle hand guiding me forward. We never know who we're raising, I began, my voice thin at first but growing stronger with each word, or who we're helping along the way. I paused, scanning the faces, some bright with admiration, others still haunted by their own regrets, and I felt a quiet power in the shared vulnerability of that instant. Kindness doesn't make headlines, I continued. It doesn't fill newspapers or dominate the evening news. It doesn't come with stock options or glossy magazine covers. I thought of the boy who huddled in my storeroom, his shoulders shaking with cold, and of the daughter who once called me Mama with such joy that the word still tastes like sunlight on my tongue. Kindness lives in the small moments, I said. The generous second helping of coffee, the borrowed blanket in a storm, the choice to believe in someone when everyone else has turned away. A ripple of understanding swept through the room, as if those simple truths had unlocked something deep inside every person there. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them steal my words. Tonight, kindness found its way back, I said, voice firm now, in the form of this beautiful gathering, in the recognition of all the unseen sacrifices that shape our futures. It found its way back to me, standing here, proof that love, even when buried beneath shame or fear, can rise again and claim its place in the light. I looked toward Evelyn, who stood with her head bowed, hands still clasped in mine. Her eyes glistened, and I knew she was hearing more in my words than the rest of the crowd, the echoes of a mother's unwavering faith, the price of bearing love in a world that often demands proof. I turned back to the audience, letting a gentle smile soften my features, and felt a surge of peace wash over me. In the end, I finished, voice soft but unyielding, we are measured not by our titles or our wealth, but by the grace we show to those who need it most. So let us leave here tonight, remembering that our greatest legacy is not what we build for ourselves, but what we nurture in the hearts of others. I set the microphone down, and the room erupted, this time in a standing ovation so filled with genuine warmth that it made my own heart swell beyond measure. In that moment, surrounded by new friends and old, by forgiveness made real and pride transformed into humble gratitude, I knew that I had given the speech I never planned to give, and that it was the only one that truly mattered. The drive home was cloaked in the hush of late-night streets, the city's glow reduced to distant embers beyond the car windows. Evelyn sat behind the wheel in her sleek sedan, her posture tense, hands gripping the steering wheel as though it were a lifeline. I settled into the passenger seat, my dress still carrying the faintest scent of orchids and champagne, the only reminder of the world we had just left behind. For miles, we spoke only in the rhythmic scratch of tires on asphalt and the soft hum of the engine. The radio played faintly, but we both kept it muted, neither of us ready to fill the space with music or words that might break the fragile peace. I watched her profile in the dim dashboard light, the hollow beneath her cheekbone, the slight tremor of her jaw as she fought to keep her emotions contained. In the rearview mirror, my own reflection looked softer, somehow more whole than when I'd arrived at the gala, and I felt a quiet gratitude for this moment of shared solitude. Finally, as we turned onto the quiet suburban street where I lived, Evelyn's voice came so low I barely heard it. "Why didn't you tell me you helped him?" she asked, each word a delicate thread tugging at the memories I had held close all these years. I thought of that young Daniel, shivering on a park bench, and of the first time I had offered him a place in my diner's storage room. I remembered the softness in his eyes when he slept, the way he called me Mrs. Moore with respect and warmth. I thought of Evelyn, bright-eyed and hopeful, before ambition's armor had hardened her heart. "Because love doesn't keep score," I answered, my voice no louder than the whisper of wind outside. It was true. Love wasn't about tallying deeds or expecting repayment. It was quiet and generous, given freely without ledger or witness. She exhaled a shaky breath, and for a moment the car seemed to tilt, as if responding to the weight of that confession. We pulled up in front of my modest home, its porch light spilling a gentle welcome onto the steps, and she killed the engine. We sat there, bathed in the glow of a single bulb, two lives converging in the soft night. Evelyn turned to me at last, her eyes glistening. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then reached out to touch my hand. No words came. Instead, the warmth of her fingers against mine said everything we had left unsaid. In that silent exchange, I felt the years of distance melt away, the unspoken apologies, the hidden truths, the daughter's pride, and the mother's unwavering devotion converging into a single, unbreakable bond. I pressed her hand gently, and she squeezed back, as if anchoring herself to the only home she had ever truly known. The hush of the night closed around us, but inside the car, hope stirred, a promise that tomorrow and every day after, we would write the next chapter together. Guided by love that knew no score, weeks had passed since that night of revelations, and life settled into a new rhythm, one measured not by silence and shame, but by the soft pulse of reconciliation. I found myself waking earlier, the dawn light spilling across my kitchen table where the invitation now sat, nestled between a vase of fresh tulips and my favorite coffee mug. It wasn't gilded or embossed this time. It was simple, thick cardstock and warm cream, a delicate script that felt like a gentle promise. "Brunch at Evelyn's home." I turned the card over in my hands, reading the words again and again. "Reserved for Mom, the woman I'm proud to be seen with." No embellishments, no qualifiers, just truth. I thought of the little girl who once pressed daisy chains into my palm, saying, "You're the best part of my day." I thought of the young woman who had turned her back on me in a ballroom of strangers. And now, I held proof that love's quiet persistence could break through even the hardest walls. On the morning of the brunch, I dressed in something soft, pastel blouse, simple skirt, choosing comfort over ceremony, the way she once told me mothers deserve ease, not extravagance. My hands trembled only a little as I tucked the invitation into my purse before stepping out into the crisp spring air. The sun felt gentle on my face, as if it too celebrated this new beginning. Evelyn's home was bright and welcoming, a reflection of the life she'd built. Tasteful decor, soft pillows, the scent of fresh bread and orange blossoms drifting through open windows. As I walked up her front steps, I caught a glimpse of her through the glass door, standing behind a long table set with white linens and pastel china. She turned and smiled, her face alight with a warmth I'd never seen in those polished gala photographs. It was the smile of a daughter who had remembered where she came from, and who she'd always wanted beside her. I crossed the threshold and felt the last echoes of doubt fall away. She led me to the head of the table, brushing a stray lock of hair from my face. Around us, guests, friends and neighbors I'd never met, rose in unison, raising glasses of mimosas in a gentle toast. To mothers, to love, to home. I sank into the chair she'd designated for me, the soft cushion cradling me like arms I'd longed for. On the plate before me lay delicate pastries and fresh fruit, but it was the invitation card, propped up at my place setting, that drew my gaze. I realized it wasn't just a seat at the table. It was an acknowledgement, a place of honor she'd chosen after years of doubt and distancing. Evelyn sat down beside me, reaching across to take my hand. No speeches, no fanfare, just the easy comfort of shared laughter and the clink of porcelain. She leaned close and whispered, "I'm proud of you." and I felt that simple truth fill every corner of my heart. As sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the soft pastel world she'd created, I understood that this moment was more than brunch. It was the culmination of every tear and every triumph, every sacrifice I'd made out of love. The seat at her table had always been mine, not granted by invitation, but earned by the unbreakable bond of a mother's devotion. And as we raised our glasses together, I realized that no gala, no stage or microphone, could compare to the quiet grace of this morning. A mother welcomed home, forever, the woman I'm proud to be seen with.